Hey there, folks. It is Brian Keene. Today is Thursday, September 18th, 2025. Those of you on Patreon will be watching this tomorrow, the 19th. Those of you on YouTube will be watching it at a later date, but I wanted to capture the date because we're going to take a walk, you and I. Right here's where I grew up. I'm not going to show you the whole house because I don't want weirdos showing up and harassing my parents. These are woods that I used to play in. Over here is the church from Goole, and indeed the cemetery from Goole. And again, I'm not going to show you the church's name because I don't need weirdos showing up and digging up graves and saying, we're reenacting Brian Keene's school. But you can look at the cemetery and see if the movie got it accurate or not. What I really want you to notice is rural central Pennsylvania, the place I write about. It's not the only place I write about. I've had stories take place in West Virginia and Oregon and elsewhere. But for the most part, just like Stephen King's stuff is set in the heart of Maine, my stuff is set right here in rural central PA. We live in a country where mass shootings don't even always get reported on the news anymore. They happen so often now that they're literally relegated to page 6 of the newspaper or the scroll going across the bottom of the feed. That's a horrifying prospect in and of itself. And yet we think, well, it can't happen here, especially in a place like this. I mean, so far we've been walking, you've seen the house I grew up in and a church, and that's it. I want you to notice just how small this area is. Because as of yesterday, there was a police blockade right there at that road, and this entire area was a crime scene. This is literally where I grew up, and I'm an author. I make my living with words. I hate the word literally because people misuse it. The same way they misuse the word like. I was like going there, and like I said, or people say, I'm literally starving to death. Are you? Are you literally starving to death? That's the edge of my parents' front yard. Again, I'm not going to show, well, you can't actually see the house from here, so we can go like that. It's where I grew up. This is literally where I grew up. Can't happen here, right? There's not enough people for it to happen here, right? Let me tell you about my childhood, and if you have read the new anthology, Why I Love Horror, and my essay, which opens the anthology, then some of this you've heard, but now we're putting, locations to it. These are the woods across from my parents' house. Spent so much time playing in there. These woods over here are far deeper. Now, we called those Bowman's Woods because the people who own them, I don't know who owns them now. I don't think they're Bowman's Woods anymore. They will always be Bowman's Woods to me. I cannot tell you the number of forts and clubhouses I built in this little stretch of woods as a kid. I cannot tell you the days I spent walking up this little road that we're walking up right now. I can't tell you the number of days I rode my BMX Mongoose up this hill and then raced back down this hill as fast as I could go. In this stretch of woods right here, I spent a glorious summer reading The Hobbit and Lord of the Rings for the first time. In this stretch of woods right here, I read much of The Stand and Salem's Lot and The Keep for the first time. I read so many comic books in these woods as a kid, and as a kid I wasn't as out of breath as I am right now coming up this hill. Woo! It seemed longer as a kid, but definitely not as taxing. Madonna has a song, "This Used to Be My Playground." Well, this used to be my playground. Remote, quiet. Listen to the quiet. You hear birds, you hear insects, you hear the occasional walnut dropping off a tree because it is fall. This is the epitome of rural small town America. The closest town is Spring Grove. Next closest town would be Jefferson or Porter Sidling. They're tiny little towns. Porter Sidling doesn't even have a convenience store or a gas station. One of my best friends lived at the end of this road. Another one of my best friends and I, we lived back that way. And yet our other friend lived yonder. Our other friend lived down in the town of Spring Grove proper. It was the 70s and the early 80s, so we didn't have cars, we were kids. So we'd just ride our bikes to each other's house, or we'd walk. I think about all the times I was on this little country road as a kid. There was still cornfield there. There was still Bowman's Woods there. So much of America and this country is changing, but I like that there's still corn where I remember it from the 70s, and these old woods are here. There's a tree down. Oh, the other thing I want to point out, we haven't seen any traffic yet. Finally, here comes the first car. Okay, that's how remote this area is. I was going to say there's a tree down there that has my initials, all my buddies' initials, me and my first two different girlfriends' initials in two different hearts. It's still there. I took Mary down to see it not too long ago. We used to have a fort back there. There's an old farmer's dump back there that we used to go rooting around in. Anyway, as I was saying, I don't know how many times I have traveled this little road as a kid. There's 365 days a year. I bet you I walked or rode my bike on this road at least 320 of them. Maybe more than that, depending on how harsh the winter was. Ghoul takes place not just in this area, but on this road. You know, the woods that the boys had clubhouses in. It's these woods. If I hadn't told you there was a crime scene here yesterday, you might think that's just a patriotic display. It's not. Nor is that. We'll get into the how and why here in a minute. All those times I was on this road, I already knew I wanted to be a writer. I knew that by 1976. I think I was 8 years old, something like that. I already knew this was what I wanted to do. So I was already coming up with stories in my head. Some of those stories actually made it to adulthood and have been turned into books. Some of them did not. Some of them I don't even remember. That's how many of them there were. Bad things happened on this road occasionally. Here's a stretch of houses. The first stretch of houses we've seen. Little modular and mobile homes. Bad things happened on this road. There was the occasional car wreck. There was, the occasional fight. There was the occasional domestic disturbance. If it was a bad year for the weather, maybe the corn didn't grow. But for the most part, just a quiet little small town road. The last thing I'm going to show you before we get into the reason for this walk is that farm straight ahead there yonder. That farm is so infamous in my childhood that it made it into 2 books, Terminal and Ghoul. Both of those books have a segment with a mean old farm dog named Catcher, who bites our young protagonists mercilessly every time they ride their bikes past that house. In both books, the young protagonist gets the idea to fill a squirt gun with lemon juice and teach that fucking dog a lesson. I was that young protagonist, and it's 100% autobiographical, and I feel guilty about it to this day. I feel guilty about it enough to the point where I used it twice in 2 different books, okay? But Catcher used to fucking terrorize me. I can't tell you how many pair of jeans and socks he destroyed. That dog was a motherfucker. But he was part of my world. He was the worst thing in my world as a kid. There was nothing worse that ever happened on this road, from my perspective, than Catcher the goddamn dog. And you may have noticed we're seeing utility trucks go by, a couple media trucks go by. That's more traffic than this road has probably had in a month. Over there is the location where we're going to go to. Yesterday, and let me think about how I want to word this, because I don't want to, I know the people involved in this, and I'm aware of who I am and my place in pop culture. I don't want to violate anybody's privacy. So, some friends of our family live in a farmhouse over there. It's a mom, 4 kids. She grew up with my sister. Her husband used to work with my father at the paper mill. He passed a few years ago from cancer. Earlier this week, family had to leave their home because one of the oldest children's boyfriend was threatening them and harassing them. There's Catcher's farm over there, and my buddy from Ghoul lived right over on the other side of that hill. Yesterday, or excuse me, today's Thursday. Tuesday, officers arrived here to serve a restraining order against this ex who was stalking and threatening the family. They could not locate the suspect. Yesterday, they returned here to the scene, at which point the suspect opened fire. He shot 5 police officers. Again, one of them is connected to my family. I'm not going to give out names. I don't know him personally. I have immediate family members who do. And that barn roof right there is where I'm talking about. 5 police officers shot in the line of duty. 3 of them are dead. They never made it home last night. 2 of them are in critical condition at the hospital where my oldest son works. As I understand it, and I am not privy to the inside investigation or anything like that, but as I understand it, the suspect was in the barn and he ambushed the officers, dropped 3 of them, and then retreated over here to the field in camouflage, where he managed to shoot 2 more. That quiet little farmhouse. 2 of the last 2 he shot, one of them returned fire, killed the suspect. So 4 people total died here yesterday. On this tiny little sleepy road, in this tiny little sleepy patch of tiny little sleepy rural central Pennsylvania. Don't say it can't happen here, because it absolutely can happen here. It can happen anywhere. If it can happen here, it can happen anywhere. All those cars are media. Fox News, ABC, NBC, CNN, local affiliates, radio. I suspect my buddy Mike Argento from the York Daily Record is probably over there somewhere. This is as close as we're getting. Because I want to be respectful. But that's where it happened, right there. It can happen anywhere. So what do we do about that? I don't know. I'm a guy who writes books about zombies and giant man-eating earthworms. I don't know what the fuck we do about that. I know that guns are a problem in this country. But I also know that we can't take away all the guns, okay? If a person wants to do something like this, it doesn't matter if that person can legally buy a gun or not. You're able to get a firearm in this country if you need one bad enough. So banning all guns, it's a non-starter. Also, I know all of you like to think of me as a progressive, and I think I am a good ally on human rights, but the fact of the matter is I support the Second Amendment. I do think there should be stricter laws. I think we should enforce the laws that we already have on the books. I think that I need a license to drive. I need a license to fish. I need a license to sell books to people. I think I should need a license to own my guns. And I wouldn't mind having to go and take a test every year to test my mental competency and my firearm handling ability and my knowledge. I'm all for that. If it's saving lives, if it's avoiding accidental shootings, if it's making sure that my brain isn't slowly being rotted by the outrage slop fed to me on YouTube and social media, I'm all for that process. Unfortunately, that process doesn't seem to attract anybody on either side of the political aisle because there's no fucking money in it, or not enough money for them. You can't ban all guns. I don't know what kind of firearm this guy used yesterday. You know, we could get into, well, we could ban semi-auto, we could ban fully. Well, fully, it's not like you can go to Walmart and buy a fully automatic weapon. Somebody who tells you that fundamentally doesn't understand firearms. But I am for licensing, certain restrictions, and above all, testing. So what do we do? How do we, as we just said, this is happening everywhere. It happened here. What do we do? We also need to really, really deep dive into mental health, folks. And I know very little about the laws where that's concerned, but it seems to me if you've got a family member who's going off the deep end and thinks that, Wi-Fi is putting cancer and alien thoughts in your brain, maybe that person shouldn't own a firearm right now. But I suppose any laws enacted in that sense could be misused. I don't know. We also, and let me be very clear, I'm not blaming the officers for what happened yesterday. It's not like they went in there and used police brutality or anything like that. This person that shot them was a bad fucking dude. He was evil. But we have seen the militarization of law enforcement here in this country. It happened after Iraq and Afghanistan. We had all that surplus equipment left over, and it was sold to local and regional police forces for a fraction of the cost. I'm good friends with the sergeant of my local police force, and they have themselves an APC, Armored Personnel Carrier. And I said, what the fuck you need a tank for? He didn't really have an answer for me, but they have one. But with that kind of firepower, you have people in law enforcement who should not be in law enforcement. Now, I have respect for anybody who runs towards the sound of gunfire, who runs towards the burning building, who runs towards the screams. But just as there are good people writing horror fiction and bad people writing horror fiction, there are good people in law enforcement and there are bad people in law enforcement. And the way our news cycle and our media run, all we ever see are the bad. And boy, when they show us the bad, they are bad. They're as bad as the suspect who shot the officers yesterday. And when you're exposed to that as a private citizen, you feel under threat. There's probably a very low-grade PTSD and paranoia that come with it, particularly if you're a person of color, if you're disadvantaged. Nobody goes hooray when cops show up at their door unannounced. So maybe we need to have better screening processes and training for the officers we do have on duty. And maybe if somebody is fired from one police force for rape or for brutalizing a suspect or for bribery, etc., maybe we make sure they can't move to a different state and take a fucking different job as a cop. Right? But none of these really fix the situation we're in, do they, America? And as I told you, I don't have the answers. I'm making this video for two reasons. One, because, like it or not, I'm a public figure, and the ground that we're walking on I have used for public media, for intellectual property. And something big happened here yesterday that made not just the national news, it made the international news. The first place I heard about it was actually not a U.S. news source. It was a news source out of the United Kingdom. And I said, holy shit, I recognize that farm. Can't be, but it was. I am making this video for that reason, because I ought to document what happened, because it's a footnote in the history of Ghoul. But that sounds very self-serving, and I don't mean it to. The two main reasons I'm documenting it are, number one, because we have forgotten how to have a dialogue in this country. Everybody hates everybody. Look, man, I can't stand the MAGA ideology, okay? I loathe Donald Trump. But I can still talk to people who voted for him. I can still treat them like human beings. Even if they're not treating others like human beings, it has been my experience that if you talk to them like human beings and treat them like human beings, they'll change step. They'll react respectfully as well. And I think it's true of the left, my progressive friends. You know, if somebody treats you with respect, they talk to you respectfully, you'll change step. We need to get back to dialogue in this country, folks. And maybe that makes me sound like the old white guy. I don't give a fuck. Because it's what we need to do. We need to be able to talk and hammer shit out. Okay, because the way we're doing things ain't working. All it's doing is leading to more incidents like what happened here yesterday. We have got to be able to sit down with the other side. First of all, sides are bullshit, okay? I'm not a Republican, I'm not a Democrat, I'm not anything. I'm an independent. I'm a centrist. I know that's a dirty word amongst some of my friends on the left and some of my friends on the right. Well, right now, fuck you, because that's what I am. I'm a centrist. I believe in human rights for all humans. All humans. I think judging someone based on the color of their skin or their sexual orientation or their gender or anything else is bullshit. And yes, I can find someone's personal political beliefs abhorrent. But they're still human beings. And we live in a country where they're supposed to have the same rights. Where we're all supposed to have the same rights. So, those of you on the right, those of you on the left, I'd like you to pause and consider that. The third reason I'm making this video is because I suspect there might be a larger book in all of this. About the history of guns in America and the history of violence in America. And I wanted to document how I felt about things as I walked up this road, because to be honest with you, I didn't know how I was going to feel when I walked up this road until I walked up this road. The thoughts I've expressed here, they're raw. They're coming to me off the top of my head. None of this was scripted. None of it was rehearsed. But I wanted to document those thoughts and how I felt, because as I said, I think there's a bigger book in this, starting with this little incident, but really digging into the history of firearms in America and the history of violence in America. Not horror, although those things I guess could be horrific. Nonfiction. But I need to ponder that a little bit more. Anyway, thanks for coming with me. If there is such a thing as sacred ground, holy ground, this little patch of America is it for me. And, you know, now it's marred. Like so many other places in America. Thanks for watching. Peace.